Deuteronomy 17:17 has a law concerning the role of the king and how he should conduct himself. The verse says, "And he," that is the king, "shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away." All right, that's basically it. The rest of the verse says, "Nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold." But people hear that verse and they say, well, clearly that Bible's against polygamy. I don't know any Christian commentator who doesn't conclude that from the verse, even though the surrounding context around that verse says, "Do not acquire excessive silver, gold, or horses." And they don't conclude that, well, that means it's wrong to have more than one horse or more than one gold coin. Yet they make an exception for wives and like, well, having more than one wife, that's a sin. So it's a little bit of that, a lot of actually special pleading. And I want to just show how that is special pleading and how that's wrong. Because in 1 Kings 11:3, it says that he, namely King Solomon is what we're talking about here, he, King Solomon, had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Now, most commentators who talk about this verse in 1 Kings recognize that it's a throwback to Deuteronomy 17:17, because Deuteronomy says, "He shall not acquire many wives, lest they turn away his heart." And here, this is exactly what happened to Solomon. Solomon married many wives, many women, and had many concubines, and it uses the same phraseology, they turned away his heart. Verse 4, "For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father." So here, 1 Kings references Deuteronomy 17 and says that Solomon violated that law. But then immediately in the same sentence, in the same context, says, "But David did not." David's heart was wholly true to God. So if David had multiple wives, which he did, and Solomon had multiple wives, which he did, but Solomon violated the Deuteronomy 17 law, but David did not, then that means that the Deuteronomy 17 law is not against multiple wives in principle. It is against excessive wives, just like the surrounding context is against excessive gold, excessive bullion, excessive horses and military power, and placing your trust in those accessories. But it's not wrong to have a military, or to have horses, or to have money, or to have wives. It's just to have too many, to overstretch yourself to the point where you can't lead them and they're leading you, where you become owned by your own possessions. And that's what happened to Solomon. He had 700 wives, 300 concubines, and they ended up owning him, leading him astray, so that he was not committed to God, as was David, his father. Verse 5 says the same thing. "For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Amorites." So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. Now, David was a man after God's own heart. David did all things according to God's law, did not turn to the left or to the right, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite and that scandal. But the Bible speaks extremely highly of David's moral fortitude, David's commitment to God. And many Christians slander David sinfully when they speak of his sins of marrying more than one woman, when they say, oh, see that? And it was the cause of his downfall. Actually, 2 Samuel chapter 12 says what the reason for his downfall was. The reason was Uriah the Hittite, and the Bible recognizes that was his downfall. And that was the reason there was turmoil in his household after that. Not because he married more than one wife, but because he took a wife that was already married. That's adultery. Here, 1 Kings shows that to be the case. So there's a distinction made here between Solomon and David, and yet Christians love to categorize these two people in the same vat of sin, which is slander. That's dishonoring a man that the Bible is holding up. And if you're doing that, you're on the wrong side of the Bible. Your moral ethic needs to be recalibrated. Okay? And I just want to give one more example of how committed David was to the law of God, because even in terms of how David treated his concubines, he followed the law. It was after Absalom had slept with David's concubines in the Old Testament, and after his concubines betrayed David in sleeping with Absalom, that when David came back, David did not put his own concubines to death. Instead, he continued to provide for them, but he did not go in to sleep with them. So he didn't kill them. He didn't put them to death for adultery because they were concubines. They didn't violate the adultery, but they did still betray him, so he no longer went into them. So here, he kind of punishes them a little bit by refusing to sleep with them, but he continues to hold on to them and provide for them and fulfill the mandates a man has to his own concubines by continuing to follow the law in Leviticus 19 and in Exodus 21 and providing for them. And so they didn't leave because he fulfilled the law to them, even though he no longer slept with them. So David was very strict and very faithful to following the law and showing mercy to people he interacted with. He was very faithful in following the Old Testament law. And everyone wants to say that he was violating the law of God, when in fact, Exodus 21, Leviticus 19, and 1 Kings 11 prove he was faithful to God. There's an episode later on in David's life where he puts a census on the people of Israel. And that's a sin also, it turned out to be. And David, when he realized it was a sin, immediately became regretful of it. But David, I believe, did not do that sin volitionally. I think he did that sin accidentally, because as soon as he realized it was a sin, he stopped and was regretful of it when he realized it was a sin. But it's not like he knew that was a sin and continued to push through in doing that. That was the sin he did with Bathsheba and killing Uriah. He knew that was a sin, but he continued pushing through with it, which is why the Bible makes an exception as to how he did veer off from the law in that regard. But he had a heart after God in that he was careful to follow every law and not veer off from the left or the right as far as he could. But I just want to say that doesn't mean he's excused from the sin of placing the census. He still had to pay for it. There was still punishment for it. And he was still a man after God's own heart, because he, even though it was a sin of laxity, it wasn't a sin of volitional forcefulness against God. So I think that's an important distinction. But all of these things David did, he was faithful to God. And it was Solomon who was turning away his heart from God, because Solomon over-married. He married so many women that he started pulling from foreign women, which the beginning of 1 Kings 11 says not to do. King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh. Verse 2, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them. They will surely turn away your heart after their gods. So I wanted to just defend David's honor and memory here, while the rest of the Western church attacks him, slanders him, tries to bring him down into the pits, and make up laws that they see him as violating when no law was ever violated. And the Bible defends him. Even the New Testament defends him. And I want to defend him also, because I don't want to be on the other side of the Bible when the rest of the commentators on the church and the Bible are constantly slandering him. I think that's a sin to be doing that, when David deserves as much respect from people in the Western church as the Bible itself gives to him.